He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together from Proverbs chapter 19, verse 17. A very fundamental principle from the Bible, for we've read it from the Old Testament, but emphasised very much in the New Testament, where Jesus said, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." That turns on its head the thinking of so much that goes on in the world. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. The implication of this is that in God's economy, God has permitted that many people be poor. But the purpose of this is to test everybody, that we might not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think, that we might not think that the poor are poor because of some judgment upon them. The vast majority of poor in the earth are poor because of the circumstances in which they were born, not of any particular thing that they have done. Although, of course, there are some who are poor because they have unwisely used those things that were given to them. But whatever the cause of poverty, he who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. Let's go to the New Testament and look at a few passages. In Luke 14 we read, Jesus was invited to dinner, and when he noted how they chose the best places, he said, "When you are invited by anyone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the best place, lest one more honourable than you be invited by him, and he who invited you and him come and say to you, 'Give place to this man,' and then you begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit down in the lowest place, so that when he who invited you comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, go up higher.' Then you will have glory in the presence of those who sit at the table with you. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." Then he also said to him who invited him, "When you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbours, lest they also invite you back, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you'll be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just." So in this example, Jesus gives two sets of instructions. One is that when you're invited, don't assume that you're the most important person and scramble for the top seat. Rather, choose to sit at the bottom. You may be permitted to stay there. If the host wants to honour you, then he can move you up to the top place. But don't exalt yourself. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. He who humbles himself will be exalted. And of course, when you give to the poor, you are humbling yourself. You're identifying with the poor. And if you ignore the poor, you are saying, "I'm better than they." You are exalting yourself, and you will be humbled. But to his host he said, and it wasn't a criticism to him because Jesus was poor, and this man had invited him, but he said, "When you give a dinner or a supper, don't ask your friends and relatives or rich neighbours. They're likely to invite you back, and it's just a social exercise whereby you have a nice meal and they have a nice meal. There's no merit in that. But if you give a feast and you invite people who will not and cannot pay you back, the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, then you're out of pocket. They cannot repay you, but you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just." So if you've done that for Jesus' sake, you are a righteous man, and God will not leave you out of pocket, as our Proverbs said. He who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. One of the remarkable statements that the Lord Jesus made was, "It is better to give than to receive." And in case you're looking for that in the Gospels, it's actually not recorded in the Gospels. but is quoted by Paul in his address to the elders at Ephesus. So this is an instruction to church leaders in particular, although it is a well-established principle. He says, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and give you an inheritance among all those who are sanctified. I have coveted no one's silver or gold or apparel. Yes, you yourselves know that these hands have provided for my necessities and for those who were with me. I have shown you in every way, by labouring like this, that you must support the weak. And remember the words of the Lord Jesus, that he said, It is more blessed to give than to receive. We have opportunities to help others, and there is a blessing in taking those opportunities. We will be out of pocket for a time, but it's an investment. We are out of pocket now, but we will receive the reward later, at the resurrection of the just. The Lord will repay. But don't expect that repayment now. There are some around who keep emphasizing that we should give because the Lord will repay us now. Make yourself rich by giving to Christian work. No, the reward for giving is ultimately at the resurrection. Of course, sometimes the Lord may see that you are a good channel for his blessing, and if you bless others with what you have received, he may give you more now, so that you can bless others more now. There's no point at which you begin to accumulate masses for yourself, but rather you become a channel for blessing others. The Lord may do that for you. John prayed for his friend Gaius that he might prosper, because he was doing exactly that. He was blessing the servants of the Lord with the wealth that he had. And so John says, that's good, and may God prosper you so that you can continue to do that ministry, helping and supporting the Lord's servants. The bottom line of this, of course, comes in the Sermon of the Mount, the very well-known principle of storing up treasure in heaven. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So, to understand where our treasure is, then test where our heart is. What is the thing that concerns us? Are we particularly concerned with our possessions, that we keep them and do not lose them, do not risk them, that they are better than those around us, that we can boast in our treasures? Is our bank balance or our house or our reputation our security for the future? It is not a very secure security. The point that Paul made very plainly to Timothy is that we brought nothing into this world, and we will take nothing out of this world when we leave. We even leave our body behind. Although there is a resurrection body for us later, it is not the same as the body that we leave behind. Thankfully, we say, as we grow older. But the point is that we can spend a lot of effort accumulating material things on earth, only to lose them. Or we can lay up treasures in heaven where they will never be lost. And how do you lay up treasures in heaven? By giving to the poor, by investing in the lives of others, so that you are out of pocket, but their life is eased. Things may be a little bit fairer in this world because you have given your excess to help someone else's deficiency. Not as Paul explains that you should become impoverished, but rather that there should be equity. And so our proverb says, he who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given.